Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time, especially like towards the end of the day. I do enjoy a maintainer track session. For so many of you, actually, let's get some audience participation. How many of you contribute to Kubernetes today? Active users of Kubernetes? Do you have any maintainers of Kubernetes in the house? Maintainers of other projects? Cool. All right. Cool. So we've got a nice little mix. So today we're gonna kind of go over what the steering committee does, what we've been working on, what we're responsible for, and kind of how we interact with the other governance groups within the project. But first things first, who we are. Maciej, do you wanna?
Yeah. So my name is Maciej, and together with Steven and 5 other friends, I remember seeing Paco. Paco's right over there. So he's our third steering member. He's the one on the far right at the bottom. We have 4 more that are not currently present. I saw some passing by in the hallway. We are the Kubernetes steering member. You have all the information, the pictures, where we work, what we do on a daily basis. I'm not going to repeat that. You can always read that information as we are talking about a little bit more interesting things.
So actually, what do you work on in the project outside of doing steering?
Oh, yeah. So it just so happens that if you currently look at each and every single one of us usually spans at least 2 or even 3 areas. It just so happens that the majority of us are technically involved in the actual either release process or writing certain parts. In my case, that's SIG CLI, so everything kubectl. If you touched kubectl, I touched it as well. If I broke it, I'm sorry, I'll fix it. Ping me on Slack, ping me on GitHub. Probably Slack is faster. If I broke controllers, I'm sorry. Same thing with regards ping supply. And batch, that's a new thing that I've been involved for the past 2 years, give or take. I remember when we set up the working group. What about you, Steven?
Yeah, so a lot of formers. I think so I used to be one of the co-chairs of SIG Azure, as well as the now defunct. They're both defunct. Now defunct SIG PM, so product program and project management of the project. So if you've heard of the little thing called KEPs, Kubernetes enhancement proposals, that is one of the things that you can blame me for. So I also spend time with SIG Release. I'm currently one of the co-chairs for SIG Release. We have a few co-chairs and technical leads, but I think I'm the most tenured at this point. So yeah, I've been doing SIG Release for a while. My team is responsible for releasing Kubernetes every cycle. I'm one of the founders of the release engineering subproject and have built up a team of release managers to I think we're about 15 now, kind of across the world. So that is my day-to-day when I'm not wearing the steering hat. And then all of these lovely folks, Sasha is one of my co-chairs with SIG Release. Ben is responsible. He's over testing, and Kate's infra. Patrick is also testing. Antonio is testing, and networking, yes. So yeah, we get around the project. I think that it's not just so what we're here to talk about today actually has nothing to do with the technical aspects of the project. We're going to talk a little bit about steering and how we do what we do. But to give you some context about Kubernetes, their community stats as of March 2025, we've got close to 100,000 contributors, right, and over 1,200 org members to Kubernetes. Huge project. I think common misconception that Kubernetes is just Kubernetes. We have multiple GitHub orgs that we maintain. So Kubernetes SIGs, Kubernetes client. Wow, what are all the ones? etcd now as well. And there's one more I'm probably missing, but
A couple more.
Yeah. It's quite a few, but over close to 400 repos and 32 governance groups within the community. So that spans across SIGs, special interest groups, right? Working groups, WGs, committees. And not so much user groups anymore, right? Yeah, we're kind of turning down user groups and pushing that up to the CNCF level. But there's quite a bunch of there's quite a bunch of moving pieces in Kubernetes from the people governance side. Cool. So what does the steering committee do? We are a governing body of the Kubernetes project, and we provide decision making and oversight pertaining to the Kubernetes bylaws, subprojects, and financial planning. What that means on a day-to-day is kind of interesting. I think sometimes we will have quiet months and years, and sometimes we'll have really active ones. A lot of the work that we do, so for reference, so I think, SIGs, or special interest groups, are our main kind of unit of work, right? So these are groups that are chartered to focus on a specific topic within the project, right? So SIG release, for example, is responsible for making sure that we release Kubernetes at a reasonable frequency and of high quality. And what goes into that? And on time. So on time is subject to interpretation sometimes, depending on what is happening. Vulnerabilities. I think doing bug fixes for features that are recently introduced can get kind of interesting. But that is what my group is responsible for. And do you want to talk about SIG CLI?
Maybe necessarily SIG CLI or SIG apps, and probably SIG release being the overarching body throughout the release process, especially that they own our body, souls, fingers, and minds for, as I was explained that recently, 3 times a year for about 14 weeks each time. All of the other SIGs abide to whatever SIG release says. We need to make sure that the features that we're working on within our smaller groups. For SIG CLI, that's literally everything that touches kubectl. For SIG apps, that's everything that touches controllers. The batch working group also touches controllers, and a couple SIG sponsor projects. That everything goes smoothly. We have the necessary enhancements in place, are reviewed, agreed on, which basically means there's one of the meetings that you usually will present your topic. You will try to convince if there are questions or answer eventual doubts. If everyone are in agreement, we are moving forward. And also, if for whatever reason, whether there is a slippage with regards to you didn't make it because life happened or anything, we can decide like, oh, okay, we won't be able to make it, and we'll just push it to the next release, or because the review process for a particular feature took a little bit longer than originally anticipated while we were either implementing or reviewing a particular feature. Additional edge cases that hasn't been discussed or discovered before are coming into the day of light. So a lot of those SIGs are pretty busy during each of the release to make sure that the train is slowly chugging forward.
So special interest groups own subprojects. Subprojects own code for the community. So the only unit of governance that owns code are subprojects, and they are governed by SIGs. There are working groups as well. Working groups are meant to be time-bounded efforts within the community that are basically agreed upon by 2 or more SIGs, right? So the time-bound may be in the order of months, maybe years, but we want to make sure that that time-bound also has some exit criteria, right? We are going to stop this working group when we have figured out how, LTS works, right? So LTS is an example where we came out of the LTS conversation with a 1-year support cycle for Kubernetes the first time around, and then people were like, we're not done with LTS yet. So a few years, I think it's a few years at this point, right? Back, we restarted working group LTS, and that's some of the major providers looking to provide long-term support and figure out what buttons and knobs need to be turned within the Kubernetes community to make that happen. Committees. So I mentioned all the governance group because committees are a little special. Committees are elected by some subset of the project, right? So in the case of steering, the committee members are yes. Wait. Right. So we have new steering members, right? Some of them are actually returning steering members, like Ben, but Sasha and Antonio joined the steering committee very recently. So the steering committee members are elected by the community, right? So if you are a Kubernetes contributor, you are eligible for the election, right? You're eligible to vote in the election. You're eligible to present yourself as a potential candidate for the election. So we have 3 committees. It's steering, the Code of Conduct Committee, and the Security Response Committee. The Security Response Committee is responsible for vulnerability management. They're effectively the open source vulnerability management team for the project, a very reasonably sized group, and also incredibly learned on security topics. But each of these groups, and then so the Security Response Committee, we don't really run elections as often for them, but they are usually new Security Response Committee members are proposed by the existing Security Response Committee. And then finally, the Code of Conduct Committee. And the Code of Conduct Committee has yes, the Code of Conduct Committee, boom. So we've got Divya, Danielle, Sean. Hey, Sean, and are the newly joining members of the Code of Conduct Committee, and we thank Hillary and Xander for their work over the last few years. So I mentioned the committees because the committees are a little special in that we have. We are the only governance group within the project that are chartered to have private conversations, right? So going back to what the steering committee does, sometimes we do a lot of things behind closed doors, and you may never see some of the things that we do. But some of the things that we do in public, on the funding slide, on the slide that mentions financial planning, we had a repo called Kubernetes Funding, right? That was owned by Steering a little while back. It's quite a while back at this point, and we would get these funding requests. Hey, I'd love a few dollars to be able to stand up testing for my project, right? I just want some infrastructure to kind of vet this idea before I continue along, and over time we were like, hey, this is something that needs to be managed by a team, right? So again, the steering committee is not meant to be a technical body. While all of the people on steering are pretty adept technically, the steering committee is not a technical body. And what we focus on doing is being a delegator, right? If there is a problem to solve, we do act as the voice of the community, right? So if there's a press release, if there's some statement that needs to be made on behalf of the community, we are the ones doing it. But from the perspective of we also want to make sure that we have the right people doing the right things, right? So when we saw lots of funding requests were coming in for infrastructure, right? We said, hey, we might need a new governance group for this altogether, right? And that is effectively the origin story for the SIG Kates Infra, right? So that SIG is responsible for managing Kubernetes community infrastructure in a way that all community members can contribute to, right? All of these governance groups are also bound by charters that they stand up, and the steering committee is responsible for approving and reviewing and approving all of those charters. So we've gone through the new steering members. We have a wonderful former steering committee member and our representative on the CNCF governing board, Christoph Blecker, at Red Hat. We have talked about our Code of Conduct Committee members. And I think what would be cool next is to maybe go into what's been happening in the community and from the context of the annual reports.
Yeah, so as Stephen was talking, we have a lot of the things that we're handling behind the doors. But one of the things that we're actually doing every single year in the open, in the community, involving all of the SIG leads or the SIG leads or chairs can promote a person to help them prepare is basically annual reports. The annual reports at this point in time are stating currently around two important questions. What is important that your SIG, your working group, did in the past year? We're talking about 2024 at this point in time, that you would like to highlight. So those are the major highlights that I went through all the 32 groups that we have, all the reports, and those are the important things. Multiple SIGs and work groups have shifted their chairs, their tech leads. If it wasn't previously explained, the difference between a chair and tech lead is at some point in time we only had one role for every SIG, and a person was both responsible for the organizational side, which basically means, for example, presenting at KubeCons, making sure that the weekly or bi-weekly meetings are on time, that there's agenda, eventually if there's no agenda, canceling, making sure that the calendar updates are up to date, making sure that the annual reports are filled in on time, and eventually responding and helping guide the work around the SIG. We've noticed that over time, certain SIGs have not rotated people, but then meant that those people, aside from those organizational things, they were also responsible for technical side of a particular special interest group or working group. So we decided to divide the roles and SIG, and that's entirely up to any special interest group decision, whether they want to have separate people that are responsible for organizational side of things, and whether they want to have a special technical lead role, which basically those are the people that will be reviewing your PRs, those will be the people that will be reviewing your enhancements for any particular subgroup. Those are the people that will help and make sure that the technical side of the group is sound and has been discussed multiple times usually. Other important things that have happened in the SIGs were also multiple SIGs in cooperation with SIG Contribex. Yes, we have an entirely separate group that is responsible for contributor experience. They help us promote all the work that is happening within our special interest groups or work groups. With their help, we are able to put together information about what's going on. We're publishing blog posts. We are able to use them to also promote the events that are happening within the community on various social medias. We have a pretty significant user base through various social medias, and it's fully nicely automated. So a big shout out to our Contribex for all the work that they are doing. Not only that, they also put together workshops which help bring new contributors into the Kubernetes project, because that's the biggest ask that we've been hearing for multiple years, that contributing to Kubernetes at this point in time is extremely difficult for newcomers. So big shout out to the SIG Contribex. SIGNode, they introduced a new role which is called CAP Wrangler, which basically means the CAP, Stephen was talking, this is a process that is helping us to define what is the new feature, what is the shape of the new feature, how we want to look, how the implementation will look like, what kind of use cases it will cover. And the CAP Wrangler is basically to help people to go through the CAP process from within the SIGNode.
So I think I want to stop and highlight CAP Wrangler for a second, because I think we were talking about SIG release a little earlier, and this is kind of where all of the, where the snowball kind of like rolls downhill, and we try to package all the things out to get out of the door on time. But it also represents, so one, it's an incredibly important role, and it kind of de-risks the release team when we have the enhancements team. The enhancements team has to start ahead of the rest of the release team sub team roles to ensure that we kind of have this bundle ready to go and people understand what we're releasing for the next cycle. So I love this from a SIG release perspective, but I also want to point out that the SIG docs has something called the Docs Wrangler, right? And the Docs Wrangler, so this is kind of a representation of like we found a role in a different SIG. We're learning from each other, right? We found a role in a different SIG that makes sense to copy, right, effectively. And I think kind of from the proud SIG release dad perspective, we have a lot of groups within the project that have adopted like handbooks, right? So I wrote some of the first handbooks for the release team way back in I don't want to talk about how long ago, but we've seen lots of governance groups across the project kind of like introduce handbooks as well. Like, hey, here's how you do the job. Like, and going to Maciej's point about it, like encouraging contributors to get started and showing them the map is a big way to do it. So I love to see kind of the cross-pollination of ideas across the SIGs and see them come out in the annual report.
Okay, so this was the first question. What do you want to highlight? Now, jumping quickly forward, the other important question that we're asking every SIG and work group is what area of the project you're struggling with. That means whether you have sufficient number of reviewers and approvers, whether that's a sub-project, because every special interest group can have their own sub-projects. This is where the Kubernetes 6 repositories come into play. This is the place where every SIG, for example, if you've been listening to keynotes on Wednesday, it was mentioned that Headlamp was being adopted as a SIG UI sub-project. So it will be under Kubernetes 6/Headlamp. And that's one of the sub-projects of the SIG UI. Every single other SIG will have their own sub-projects. And those are one of the potential areas that they might need help because, for example, in case of the SIG CLI, we have a CUI project. And sadly, we lost the main contributor. We cannot get... we haven't heard from them in a while. We're trying to reconnect, but if we're not able to connect and get the maintainer back, that means we will have to archive the repository because we don't have anyone who is interested in. And in a similar fashion, all the special interest groups and all work groups, and that's unfortunately a separate slide because there's like this many help that we actually need. We're only a handful of people that are keeping the project running. I should have put the XKCD. Maybe we're not as small as the people from the XKCD. On the other hand, how big the user base is of the Kubernetes itself, that's probably still not an overstatement. So SIG docs will always happily accept help to work with docs and blogs specifically. Recently, they announced that they are having issues with German and Vietnamese translations. We have several of the docs in various languages available. And it just so happens that both the German and the Vietnamese translation lost their current maintainers, and we are on the lookout for new maintainers that will be willing to step up and help with those pieces of our documentation.
So I think this also highlights, it's important to talk about what we're doing, but also where we need help because, and I think, in the CUI case and a few of these projects, I think people don't realize, as you were mentioning, that there are these little microcosms within Kubernetes, right, where there is help needed, right? Like, if we were to talk about again SIG release, right? We would love more release managers, right, to continue following the sun. But we should, for anyone who is interested in Kubernetes and interested in a project that looks familiar to you on this slide, like take a moment, take a picture. Like we are looking for that. But on the other hand, right, it's also natural and healthy process to talk about what it looks like to spin down a project, right? Sub-projects should not necessarily last forever. And when they stop making sense, they should be archived. And there should be a healthy discussion about how and when to do that. I think we've got a pretty good process. But again, on this need help slide, if you're seeing something that you're interested in and is important to your day-to-day, take a moment and think about contributing to this.
Like I mentioned, the work groups, they have their own set of problems and set of challenges that they are also working with. And even as Stephen was mentioning, the work groups are only time-bound and we are moving slowly forward. For example, the structured logging. Their goal is to make sure that the structured logging is present in Kubernetes. As soon as they achieve that goal, this is their exit statement. We will be winding that down. The batch, that one, just want to make sure that we have the necessary primitives to run any kind of batch workloads. I know it's pretty open-ended, but there are very specific exit criteria. And even though they are sometimes similar to or overlapping with what device management, for example, or serving work group, which are the new work groups that we've mentioned in one of the previous slides that were spun up recently, they have their own very specific exit criteria, and any help with regards to what they are working on, which are the projects, whether that's a part of the core Kubernetes, whether that's one of the sub-projects that they are handling, that's the work. And if you're interested in definitely showing up for one of the meetings or just pinging people on Slack, asking questions, I can tell you one thing, the Kubernetes community is probably one of the most welcoming communities that I've ever been part of. There's no stupid questions, and I know having a major imposter syndrome, I've never been afraid to ask questions, even to senior members of the community, or asking them for help, for reviews. I'm always telling everyone, if you have any questions, if you need a review, if you need an advice, a little bit of hand-holding, just ping me on Slack, ping me GitHub. I'm getting too many notifications on GitHub. Slack is always faster. I will not always be able to get to your PR, your ask, but I don't mind being pinged again and again. Because just life happens, and sometimes I don't remember my name and the week just flew by, and well, there's weekend, I'll recover, and then there's Monday, and I'm all re-energized and I'm able to help resolve your problem.
So in the spirit of asking questions, I realize we are running short on time, but if anyone would like to, first, there's where to find us. We've got a QR code. I'm going to give you all the information about how to meet us, but in general, github.com/Kubernetes/community will give you access to all of the governance groups and who people are and how to find them. So do we have maybe a question or two before we go? Anyone want to step up?
Also, I'll mention that aside from today's meeting, every first Wednesday, and that was yesterday, we are online for you to ask questions. You can always reach out to us on the public, either mailing list or our Slack channel. And like I said, every first Wednesday, you can bring any kind of questions that you might have. We'll be covering various topics. Because it just so happens that a lot of us is heavily and technically involved in Kube, frequently we will divert the discussions to various topics which are at hand at any given point in time. The community's questions are always resolved first, because we want to make sure that the problems you're bringing to the table are being handled with the highest priority.
Last call for questions for this session. Okay, quick and painless. Thank you everyone for taking the time today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your KubeCon.